So in this video, I want to show you step by step how to build this entire outdoor furniture set. I've done a video previously where I talk about how I'm selling these and the thought process behind why I started to make these. But this video is just going to be a pure tutorial video of how I build them. So this may seem like a big and daunting project, and it is pretty big in size, but I believe that even if you are a beginner woodworker and you have pretty limited tools, you can still make this. So we're going to break this build down, and hopefully you will see that each step is actually not that complicated. So hopefully by the end of this video, you will have the confidence to maybe go out and try and build one of these yourself. Especially, the bench with outback is probably the easiest one. And then the dining table, and the most difficult or most complicated build is the bench with the back, and that is purely because of this back piece. But of course we're going to break that down as well. Okay, so here is the material that you need for the entire outdoor furniture set, which includes one dining table, one bench with back, and one bench without a back. Of course you can do whatever you want. If you want to have two benches with a back or two benches without a back, that is fine as well. I will say that the bench without back is a lot easier to make than the bench with the back. Okay, so what you'll need is around 8 meters of 4x4 material. You will need around 10 meters of 3x3 material. You will need 10 meters again of 2x6. And by the way, I know it is a little bit confusing that I mix, between imperial and metric. That's just how it is here in Norway. For some reason, when we talk about the dimension of lumber, we use imperial, so we call it 4x4, even though it is 4x4 inches. And then we can say that you need 1 meter of a 4x4. It is a bit confusing. That's just how it is. So around 10 meters of 2x6. You need like 1.5 meters of 2x4, and then we need 22 meters of 2x8. Now, the important thing when you buy the 2x8s is that you have to keep in mind that you need 9 total lengths of 2 meters, or around 79 inches. Because that's how long the table and the benches are. So what I think about when I buy these is that I look for 5 boards that are at least 4 meters. Then you can cut them in half and you get 2 boards at 2 meters long. So even if you buy a very long one like this one, this is 5.5 meters. I bought this because it was one of the prettiest ones. So it's 5.5 meters, but you only get 2 total lengths of 2 meters. So 1.5 meters actually goes to waste here. Now in this video I'm going to show you everything you need to know and all of the lengths and all of the cuts and everything. But if you want to get the woodworking plans just to make things a bit easier when you're in the shop, you can get those on my Etsy shop. I have made an updated version which is a lot more detailed, and I've also converted it so that they are now available in both imperial and metric. So you can get those on my Etsy store, and I will link them down in the description as well. Okay, so I like to start by cutting the 2x8s. So we're going to cut 9 boards at 2 meters. That will be for the tabletop and also for the seats for both of the benches. If you do have a miter saw, and especially one that can cut up to 4 inches like this one, it makes everything a lot easier when building this outdoor furniture set. However, you can actually cut all of the boards that you need just using a circular saw. Okay, so I'll make the mark at 2 meters, and then I like to use a speed square to get a straight cut. I'm just going to put the blade of the circular saw on the mark. Then I'll put the speed square up against the saw and use that as a guide. I've got all of the 9 boards here. I got 5 over here. This is for the table, then 4 over here. Those are for the 2 benches. And I just sort of arranged them pretty quickly here. I like to put the prettiest ones for the dining table, and I want to put the prettiest facing downwards. The table is now upside down, so the legs will come up here. So it makes sense to have the ugliest side facing up. However, on some of the boards you will see the pith, so the center of the tree. And if you have that visible and you have that facing towards one of the faces, you want to make sure that the pith faces upwards right now. So I'm going to flip this one over. And the reason for that is that when you have the pith very close to one of the faces, it's more likely to crack. So we want to have the crack on the underside of the table instead of at the top of the table. So I'm going to do the same for the benches as well. So once I have arranged them and put them in the order that I like, I'm just going to leave them for a little bit and we can move on to the legs for the dining table. Now for the dining table legs, we're going to use 4x4 material. If you can't get your hands on 4x4, you can use 2x4 that you glue together. But of course it's going to be a lot quicker with 4x4. And it's very hard to find like perfectly straight and nice looking 4x4 boards. What you have to keep in mind is that the entire length doesn't have to be perfectly straight, because we're going to cut it into smaller pieces. So as long as it's not very warped or twisted, if it just has like a bow on it, that doesn't really matter, because when we cut it into smaller pieces, you won't really see it. So legs are going to be 65.8 centimeters long, and that is so that the table ends up at 75 centimeters. If you want to make them at 66 centimeters, you can do that as well. That doesn't really make a difference. And we are going to have 2 parallel cuts at 6.5 degrees. So on each end of the leg, we are going to have 6.5 degrees going in the same direction. Why 6.5? That's a great question. When I made the model in SketchUp, I first tried 6 degrees, thought it was a little bit too steep. Then I tried 7 degrees, and I thought it was a little bit too much angle. So 6.5 degrees it is. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so let us cut 4 legs at 65.8 or 66 centimeters with 6.5 degrees on each side going in the same direction. Now if you don't have a miter saw that can cut 4 inches thick material or 10 centimeters thick, what you can do is to use, if you have a smaller miter saw, you can use that and first cut as deep as you can. Then you flip the board over and make the rest of the cut from the other side of the board. I have done that several times. I used to do that for my first 2 outdoor furniture sets that I made. Then I sold those and I used the money that I made to buy the bigger miter saw. So that's usually how it is with woodworking. You have to start with what you have, and then hopefully you can make some money and you can upgrade the tools. That is at least how I did it. But now I want to show you how you can make this cut and make it perfectly at 6.5 degrees, even if you just have a circle saw and a speed square. Okay, so this end is already at 6.5 degrees. Then I've made a mark at 66 centimeters. I'm just gonna put my speed square up against this mark with a straight edge going down at the mark here. Then I'm gonna pivot the speed square, and you're gonna see some numbers at this edge here, all the way from 0 to 90 degrees. So if I put it at 5, so that number 5 hits on this back edge, then this angle is 5 degrees. So I'm going to keep tilting it until we're at 6 and right between 6 and 7. Of course, we have 6.5 degrees. So now just making sure that the pivot point is at the line and that we're at in between 6 and 7 here on the back edge. And I can make a line here. And then this is now 6.5 degrees. I'm going to take the speed square again at the straight edge. Make a line here. Flip it all the way over. Make another 90-degree line. And then I'm going to join these two lines and they should be at 6.5 degrees. Like that. You can use a speed square again as a straight edge. You can use a clamp. That would probably be smart. I'm just going to try and do it freehand. Because if we just sand this a little bit, we have an end that is at least close enough to being 6.5 degrees. Okay, so we got the 4 legs and now we can move on to the stretcher that goes between the legs. But first, we have to talk about something that's very important. So when I buy 2x8 material here in Norway where I live, I get boards that are actually pretty close to being 8 inches wide. However, after talking with some of you guys over in the US, I have learned that when you buy 2x8, you get something that is closer to something like 7.25 inch wide boards. That means if you build a tabletop with boards that are 7.25 inch wide, then you make legs that are as wide as the legs that I would make, then you might end up with a tabletop that is narrower than the legs. That's not going to look very good. So what you have to do when you make the legs, when you make the stretcher and the top board of the leg assembly, make sure that you make them 2.5 inches shorter than what I make them. Now if you follow the woodworking plans and the measurements that is in the Imperial version of the plans, then you don't have to worry about it. Just follow those measurements. But if you just follow the video, don't just convert the measurements that I use over into Imperial, because you want to take away, as I said, at least 2.5 inches from the length that I have on the stretcher and the top board of the leg assembly. So the stretchers, again, they have a 6.5 degree cut on each end, this time going in the opposite directions, making a trapezoid. And I've cut them at 70.6 centimeters between the longest points. You can cut them at 70, doesn't really make a difference. For you Americans, with your narrow 2x8s, you're going to have to cut them at 25.25 inches from the tip to tip. You're going to need 2 of these. Finally, for the legs, we're going to need the top board, and I'm using 2x6 for this. And I start by just cutting 2 straight cuts, and these are going to be 95 centimeters long. For you Americans, it's 35 inches. So we got 2 of these now, and if you want to, you can just leave them like this with a straight edge. For me, I like to add like a decorative 45 degree cut on the ends here. Just putting the miter saw at 45 degree and move it over like probably like an inch from this edge, and make a mark with a pencil on the miter saw. Then I can just flip it around and put it at the same mark again and make the next cut. Okay, so I got 4 legs, I've got 2 stretchers, and I got the 2 top boards. And I like to give the legs in the stretcher a 45-degree chamfer with a router on all of the edges. And I also like to sand all of the parts before assembling, just because it's easier to get a nice and clean sanding. I've sanded all of the parts with 120 grit sandpaper, and now we can move on to assembling the legs. So first I just want to take a look at the legs and make sure that I get the prettier side facing out. I don't want to have, if I can have these knots and marks facing in towards the middle of the table, that's of course going to be better. Now when assembling the legs, you can just use screws if you want to and have them visible. But you would have to get some pretty giant screws if you want to do that. The screws that I'm using are 140 millimeters. That is because I'm going to drill a pretty deep hole and then plug them. So they don't have to be that long. But if you're going to have just visible screws and don't plug them, you should probably get some that are, I would say, at least 160 millimeter long. Probably a bit longer. So we're going to need to have some giant screws. So again, I'm going to plug the screw holes, and I'm going to make the plugs myself using a plug cutter, because by doing that I can get pressure treated wood for the plugs as well. I'm going to show you afterwards how to do that, but first let's come a little bit closer up and I can show you how we're going to mark out the holes for the screws. Here's the leg, and here is the prettier side that I want to have facing out. So I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to make a mark 5 centimeters from the end, or 2 inches, and I'm going to make a line. Then I'm going to take one of the stretchers, put it on the line, and just going to transfer the edges of the stretcher over on the legs. I'm going to flip the leg over again, use a square, make lines all the way across. So this is where the stretcher is going to be on the other side. I'm going to take a ruler and just put it so that it goes across from this corner to the other opposite corner, and this is 13 centimeters from the corner to the corner. I'm going to move in 4 centimeters from this edge, or from this corner, and then 4 centimeters from this corner. Make an X, and then make an X here, and that is where I'm going to drill the holes for the screws. So again, I'm going to drill holes for the plugs as well. I'm going to use a 13 millimeter drill bit. That is because the plug cutter that I have will cut plugs that are 13 millimeters big. So I'm going in about, I would say, 2 centimeters, maybe like 3/4 of an inch. And now I can take all of the other legs and I can just transfer the lines from this one and repeat the process again. Okay, so I drilled holes for all the 4 legs now, and now I'm going to take one of the legs, one stretcher. I'm going to line the stretcher up with this line on the back side of the legs. Then I've switched to a long drill bit. So this one is 4 millimeters thick The screws are 6 millimeters, so it is a little bit thinner. I think actually it's maybe 4.5. And I'm just going to drill a hole down the center of this bigger hole. And now I can attach the screws. And now we have one of the legs done. I'm just going to repeat this exact same thing on the 4 other legs. And now we're going to attach these top boards, and just going to measure out and make sure that they are centered both this way but also this way. And I'm going to use 3 100 millimeter screws into each leg to fasten this top board. Now we can make the plugs using the plug cutter on the drill press. So we got a 13 millimeter plug cutter here, and I'll make sure to link this down below in the description, as well as the other tools and accessories that I use in this video. So I'm going to use a leftover scrap 2x6 or 2x8, and I'm gonna make probably like 30 plugs because we're gonna use them later for the benches as well. I'm gonna make 30 holes, and then we can cut the plugs loose afterwards on the table saw. So here I am cutting a couple of grooves roughly halfway through the boards on the underside of the tabletop, leaving maybe 2 to 3 centimeters on the ends. Now, I've been taught that this will help against cracking as it relieves some of the tension. I'm not entirely sure about this though, but I'm thinking it can't hurt, so I'm gonna do it anyway. If you have some knowledge about this or can explain why or why not this makes sense, please share your insights in the comment section. And I then sanded all of the boards with 120 grit sandpaper. So now we are ready to attach the legs to the tabletop, and I'm going to start by making a mark 15 centimeters from the end. I'm going to do that on this side and on the middle board, and then on this side as well. And then on this middle board, I want to make a mark at the center of this board. So it's 20 centimeters. I'm going to make a mark at 10. This will be the center of the table. Then I'm going to do the same on the leg assembly. So 95 centimeters. So that is going to be 47.5. That's the middle. So now we know that when this line hits this line or this mark, the leg assembly is centered. I'm going to put it on the line, and now we can start to attach the middle board, and I'm going to use 80 millimeter screws, just making sure that they don't go through the tabletop, of course. And I like to use 4 screws into each board. So that is 20 screws in total on this side and 20 on the other side. And then from here we're going to move on to the next boards, and you just want to find something that is around 5 millimeters thick. I'm using this one. I'm just going to use this as a distance block to get the right distance or the right gap between these boards. Making sure it's flush. I'm going to attach these just using one screw. I'm going to do the same with the end board. Now I'm going to do the exact same on the opposite end, and once I know that everything lines up nicely, then I can screw in the rest of the screws. And here I'm cutting the braces. So these are made from 4x4s and they have 45-degree cuts on each end going in opposite directions. These are 98 centimeters long. I place them up against the leg assembly and mark out where it hits the stretcher. I cut away that part with a 45-degree cut on the miter saw. Now, unfortunately, I've lost some of the footage of installing the braces, but I start by marking the center of the stretcher and also both ends of the braces, and then finally the center of the tabletop. I'll then have two 140mm screws going down into the tabletop, and you want to be very careful here that you don't go through the tabletop. I then have two 140mm screws going into this stretcher as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the legs for the benches. Again, I'm going to use 3x3 material. I'm going to have two 6.5-degree cuts, so one on each end, going in the same direction. They're going to be parallel, and I'm going to cut 8 lengths at 35 centimeters. So now we got all of the 8 legs, and I also cut the stretchers for the legs. So these are, again, they have 6.5-degree cuts on each side, this time going in opposite directions. And for the bench with the back, they are 28 centimeters from tip to tip. And then for the bench without back, they are 23 centimeters from tip to tip. And I got 2 of each. So now I'm going to go ahead and do pretty much the exact same as I did with the dining table legs. I'm going to go over with the router with a 45-degree chamfer on all of the edges, and I'm going to sand them. Then I'm going to mark out where the screws will go. I'm going to drill holes for the plugs, and then I'm going to assemble and finally add in the plugs and then the top board. So I've cut all of the top boards for the legs now. I've used 2x6, and I've got 2 that are shorter. These are 35 centimeters long. They are for the bench without the back, and I've got a 30-degree cut on each and going in opposite directions. You don't have to have the 30-degree cut. You can just have straight cuts if you want to. I just think that this looks a little bit better. And then for the bench width back, they need to be a little bit longer. So I start by cutting just some straight cuts at 40 centimeters. And then I tilt the miter saw at 6.5 degrees and I measure 38 centimeters, make a cut there. And then again, on the other end, I'm gonna have that same 30-degree cut just to make it look a little bit better. You can have it straight if you want to. And we're gonna have 2 of those as well. So I have sanded the top boards with 120 grit sandpaper, and now I can start to attach them to the legs. So for the shorter ones, they're just going to be centered on top of the legs. I'm going to use 2 100mm screws down into each leg, like this. And then for the longer ones, we're going to take the side or the end that is cut with 6.5 degrees. And this is just going to go flush with the back side of the leg. So just sort of continues this angle, and then it's going to be centered in this direction. And again, I'm going to have 2 100mm screws down into each leg. Now for the bench without back, I did the exact same as on the table. I measured in 15 centimeters from the end and placed the legs in the center with a 5mm gap. I used 4 80mm screws into each board on both sides. After installing both of the legs, I measured the distance between them and I cut a 3x3 at that length. I like to add this because there's no real support for the legs, and this will really help stiffen them up. For the bench with back, the back support piece will help support the legs, but if I know that the bench is going to be in an area where there is a lot of snow, for instance, I like to add this long 3x3 on the bench with back as well. I transferred the edges of this long stretcher over on the short leg stretcher and drilled holes similar to what I did on the legs. I used 140mm screws. For the bench with back, we're going to have the 6.5 degree side going flush with the edge of the seat boards, 15 centimeters from the end. Again, 4 80mm screws into each board. So now it's time to make the most complicated piece of this build. That is this back support board that goes like this. Now it's made out of a 2x4, and we're just going to start by cutting a 30-degree cut on both sides at 70 centimeters. Okay, now first I am going to go from this shorter side, and I'm just going to measure down 22.5 centimeters. And I'm going to make a line across. I'm using a Sharpie just to make it easier for you guys to see what's going on. Ideally, you should use a pencil. Made a line across, and then from here, I'm going to measure in 3 centimeters and 3 centimeters. Now we're going to cut away this part. And then from this line, I'm going to measure down 10.5 centimeters. And from the other side, I'm going to measure down 40 centimeters. And I'm going to go in from this edge, go in about 1 centimeter. Now I'm going to make a line from this mark over to this mark. And then that will be the angle of the back. So we're going to remove this as well. And then finally, from this mark, I'm going to measure in 6 millimeters. And then I'm going to put the ruler on that 6 millimeter mark. I'm just going to angle it until it hits this line at 5 centimeters. Okay, so now 5 centimeters is hitting this angled line. So I'm going to make a line across there as well. So we want to remove this little part here. So all of this plus this little part. So we can start by cutting this just across here with a straight cut. Then we can make this big angled cut, and I usually do that on the miter saw. And then this one we can do on the table saw, and then do the rest on the bandsaw. But you can also use a jigsaw if you don't have a bandsaw. And now I'm going to put the miter saw at 28.5 degrees. So 28.5. And I'm going to add this board that has a 45-degree cut on this end. Now I'm going to line this up until I see that the blade hits the line. It should line up pretty well with the angle. So there we go. Now I'm just going to go over the edges with the router, then sand it, and we are ready to assemble it. Now I'm going to attach this back support board to the legs. And I'm going to use 3 different sizes for the screws here. That is just to make sure that we don't go through the leg. So at the bottom I start with a 80mm screw, and then at the top I want to try to hit this seat board with ideally an 140mm screws. I've ran out of those, so for now I'm going to have to use a 120mm screw. And again I want to try to hit this seat board, and then in the middle between these two I'm going to have a 100mm screw. Now you can drill holes and plug these if you want to, just like we did on the legs. But for me, I'm thinking this is at the back of the bench, so I'm just going to pre-drill and just have the screws. So now I'm just going to measure that this is centered down at the bottom here. I'm going maybe 4 centimeters from the bottom. I'm going to take the 80 millimeter screw. And then to get the angle of this right, I like to use just a water level, just making sure that the bench sits level. And there we go. Now I can pre-drill, and I'm gonna aim for the seat board. And then in the middle between these two, I'm going to have the 100 millimeter screw. Then I just do the exact same on the other side as well. So cut the boards for the back, and these are made from 2x6. They are 2 meters long, and I just gone over them again with 45-degree chamfer on the router, and I've sanded them. I'm gonna attach them using some 100 millimeter screws. I'm gonna have 2 on each side into each board. I'm just gonna pre-drill and then screw them. And I'm just lining them up with the end of the seat. And I'm using the same 5 millimeter spacer in between here as I did on the tabletop and the legs, or the benches. So now I've just added the brass plate with my logo on. I get this from a Norwegian website, and I'll put a link for that in the description. And then I've also sanded everything with 120 grit sandpaper. And that is it. Now I've tried to cover as much details as possible in this video, but if you still have some questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section or to reach out to me somewhere else. Again, I recommend getting the woodworking plans. They will make the build process a lot easier and a lot quicker, and they are available in both metric and imperial on my website or on my Etsy store, Baloni woodworking.etsy.com. Now I do have more videos of outdoor furniture, and if you'd like to check out a video of a outdoor lounge chair with a pull-out footrest, you can check out this video.